Welcome to Heart Collaborations, where we explore the heart of wellness, mental and emotional well-being, relationships, personal passions, and thriving parenthood. Hi, I'm Annette.
And I'm Anita. Collectively, we have over 50 years in the educational and mental health arenas. Whether you're looking for information, personal stories, or just a place to feel seen and heard, you're in the right place. Join us as we dive into conversations that inspire, empower, help you grow, and add a little laughter to your life.
Hey, welcome. We're glad you're here with us at Heart Collaborations. And today we're going to be drawing some lines in the sand. No, we're really going to be talking about boundaries. And when I think about this, instead of thinking about lines in the sand, I think about riding as a kid in the car with my two brothers. And we would draw a little line between us in the seat. And we'd be like, don't cross that line. And if they cross the line,
I grew up with sisters and we shared. The only thing we didn't share was a hairbrush.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
We would hand fight over the handbrush.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, nobody could share a brush.
I'm not sure I believe that totally, but we'll go with it. All right. But seriously, talking about boundaries today, very important topic. And I'll be honest, it's not a topic that I feel like I have a lot of personal expertise in, meaning that I always do it that great in my own life. So I definitely have some, room to grow in that. And it's been really great researching that the last few days. And as I've been doing that, I've thought, wow, that's something I want to take forth with me in my own life. So really hoping that this episode will be meaningful to everybody listening. When I think about boundaries, I got to tell you, so we've worked together. We're not currently working together, but we have worked together in the past and for about 17 years. And I feel like you could give a master class on boundaries. No, I'm serious. I'm really serious. I can remember it, and I don't even remember the specific situation or scenario, but I can remember a couple of times, going to you, and you were always, respectful, but dang, you were firm. And maybe I was feeling, overwhelmed, or I couldn't get to this. And so I might go to you to see if you could get to it, and you couldn't get to it either, And so, but whereas a lot of people might just, go, okay, and then resent it or talk about you behind your back kind of deal, you would just set a firm boundary. And honestly, it caught me off guard at first.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it did. But I didn't have any resentment or anything like that. I would kind of afterwards, giggle to myself, be like, dang, that Anita can set those boundaries.
So I want to know, why were you caught off guard?
Well, I think that's why we're talking about boundaries, right? And I think especially in the workplace, and we're going to be talking about in terms of relationships, period, right?
Right.
But sometimes in the workplace, I think maybe people are less likely to set boundaries. I don't know.
But in the workplace?
I think sometimes, yeah.
I think it's so important because we teach people how to treat us.
Right.
And if we don't know our values or what we want or our needs, then we can't teach people that. So
I agree, yeah. And so I would walk away from that situation. I might not be going, yay, Anita couldn't help me. But I always was okay with it. So let's figure out another way to make this happen, right?
Right.
And respected you for just really your ability to do that in a respectful way.
Just to say no.
Yeah, to say no. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So the benefits of having a boundary is, one, still keeping that relationship, especially a professional relationship. Two, with even in a personal relationship, having boundaries is such a benefit because that means that you're not going to hurt someone else and someone else is not going to hurt you.
Right.
I
think some people may even be going, what are boundaries? right?
Yeah.
Because so let's start there. Let's talk a second about what are boundaries.
Well, boundaries to me are, let's say, things that I will allow and things that I do not allow. It's like the beginning of me, the beginning of someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said earlier, it's treating people how to treat us.
Mm-hmm.
If I allow someone to continuously pile on my plate,
Mm-hmm.
then they're going to do so because I haven't told them, hey, I'm not okay with that.
Right.
And so they'll continue to do that. So it's really important to just tell them what's on your mind.
Yeah. And I think as
Mm-hmm.
we talk about boundaries, I think to me, a really important part of that is kind of an overarching idea or theme that
Mm-hmm.
you can set boundaries, but still be caring. You can
Oh,
set
yeah.
boundaries and still be,
Mm-hmm.
kind. And so, I think that's really important is to have that mindset or that
Mm-hmm.
intention that I'm going to have an idea about my values and limits and all those
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things. Um, and that it's important to set boundaries, but boundaries aren't punishment.
Well, and boundaries can change.
Yeah. Hmm.
I think that's a very important factor is that maybe
Definitely.
maybe a year from now
Hmm.
or I didn't have this boundary, but now that I have new experiences, I have this boundary.
Right. And even with the same person that you're in relationship with, just like you're saying it,
Mm-hmm.
at this particular moment,
Yeah.
um, I might have not had this boundary in the past, but maybe some things have changed in my life.
Yeah.
Maybe I have more time constraints. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to have a boundary for this particular period of my life. So
Yeah.
yeah, as you're
Yeah.
as you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
boundaries can change for sure.
Yeah. So we're talking about it. It helps with relationships.
Hmm.
It
So about
helps.
relationships, I think it gives it's the clarity helps to decrease arguments, to decrease misunderstandings.
Mm-hmm. It helps with feel a little bit more confident about where you are,
Hmm.
that people respect you, your self esteem. Also, for your health, it's better. You're less stress. And then our needs are met.
Yeah. How am I
Yeah.
going to, you know, be someone who, if I don't know what your needs are, what your limits are, then it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
hard for me to, as a good friend or a good coworker
Mm-hmm.
or acquaintance, to try to help meet those needs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then self-esteem. I think this is a big one. I think this is a big one. Um, wow. So if you're not setting limits in a relationship, it is going to
Mm-hmm.
be hard for you to have a good self-esteem. It's,
Oh,
yeah, because
okay.
you're going to feel victimized.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things that I always tell people, about boundaries is that I always think about the three types of boundaries. I think about the rigid doors where nothing comes in, nothing comes out, right?
Hmm.
And those doors are always rigid.
Okay.
And so then people see you as not being rigid. And, then we have the doors that are just porous, always open, always saying yes.
Hmm.
That's when we feel like a doormat.
Hmm.
And we feel, we might have a little bit of resentment and we can never stand up for ourselves.
Right.
And so,
And it's not the other person's fault. If you
right,
can't stand up for yourself,
it's
if you
us.
can't, let
Yeah.
somebody know what you need
Mm-hmm.
and
So,
but it's not always
yeah.
easy to do that. So we
Well,
get that, right?
right. And if you internalize those feelings,
Hmm.
you can't help but not to like yourself.
Yeah.
And that's when we
Right.
see some of that self-loathing.
Hmm.
So really, the best doors are the healthy doors. I call them the swinging doors,
Hmm.
where you can say no and you can say yes, totally up
Hmm.
to you.
Right.
And
Right.
that is when you know your values, your needs, and your wants. You
Hmm.
know what you're interested in, and if you have those, then you can say yes and no whenever you want to.
Hmm.
But if you don't know your values and you don't know what's important in your life, that is when you might use the other doors and it may not be the best for you.
True. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So, just thinking about reluctance to set boundaries and so why can it be hard sometimes to set boundaries? What makes setting boundaries so hard sometimes?
Maybe the way we grew up, our family environment,
Mm-hmm.
we might be scared or we may not have the self-esteem
Right. And
either.
and so in terms of being scared, the types of things you might be scared of, you might be afraid of rejection, right?
Yeah.
You might be afraid that someone's going to think negatively about you. There, so I think fear can get in the way of setting boundaries.
Yeah, I was thinking especially of the elementary students and how they may not know what boundaries are and how important it is to teach them that because, some of the, especially girls, some of them can be really mean. Especially, trying to get the girls to, you know, find a true friend, but
Right.
instead of them thinking, oh, maybe this person, you know, doesn't like me or likes me, and they try to fit in into around circle when they're not around circle, then that only puts more pressure and stress on them instead of trying to teach them how to treat them.
Right. And I think that, if you haven't been taught boundaries in the home, then you're not going to show boundaries on the playground. You're not going to show boundaries in college. You're not going to show boundaries in relationships. So, as parents, one, we need to be able to work on establishing our own boundaries and honoring the boundaries of others. But also, we need to be intentional that that's a concept that we want to
Right.
teach, right? And we want to model that.
Yeah, I was going to say we are the models for our children, so we have to.
So, being that I said that I felt like you could teach a master class on boundaries. So, how are the little kiddies doing in your life? Are you being a good model for that? Are they picking up those boundary skills?
I think I'm a pretty good model.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I know my own kids will say no without an excuse or whatever, or if they feel like okay, I'm not valued in this area, then they know to walk away.
yeah. And I think I sometimes I'm playing or jesting, but hearing you say that really. Okay, I can get emotional, people. Sorry.
Go ahead and say
But
it. What are you trying to say in
no,
that?
it really touches me. It touched me because I think that's such an awesome thing that you feel like your kids are in that position of learning boundaries and able to say no because it's so important. So
Oh, yeah.
that's very meaningful to me to hear that, and it touches me. So whatever.
And that's a softie. So, we talked about how hard it can be to set boundaries, but I think the most important part is that when we don't have boundaries, that right there to me is the hard thing for anyone really to go through. And I was thinking about this because I saw it on a TikTok, right? This guy's trying to get a date and he says anybody can treat me bad because my parents treated each other bad and no one ever left.
Oh,
And so he's like, come with me and I'll never leave.
wow. Dang.
And I'm like,
yeah.
no boundaries, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and
It's pretty
but
sad, huh?
yeah. And then I thought about it and I thought, okay, well, if he doesn't know what boundary setting is, imagine how he would treat the other person.
Right. Goes both ways, right?
Right.
Yeah. So boundaries can be about how, well, boundaries are really about you. Boundaries are about you. And then how that other person responds, then at that point you have a response as well. Did we, and we may have, but did we talk about how, to really be able to set boundaries, you have to know yourself? You have
Well, I don't think
to,
we've gone over that, but that is a good one. It's right there.
yeah, like, I've been in situations before where, yeah, where sometimes I might be, interacting with someone who I felt like struggled with boundaries and enmeshment, that sort of thing. You want to define enmeshment?
I'll let you define enmeshment.
Okay,
I don't know
I'll
what you're
define
talking about.
enmeshment. So enmeshment is where those boundaries they're fuzzy, they're crossed, right? And that part that we talked about right at the beginning about how boundaries let you know where you end and where someone else it begins, or someone else begins and you end. I said that reverse, but you know what I'm saying. That if so enmeshment means those lines aren't there. It's all
blurred.
muddled, right?
Yeah, all blurred.
And there are times when I might be, relating to someone that's sort of like that. And if there's something that you need an opinion about, like, okay, do you like the red dress or the blue dress, right? I won't go, I like the blue dress, because I'm afraid if I say I like the blue dress, then they're just going to hop on because they're not confident in their own opinions and ideas and thoughts and feelings. And so instead of them going, nah, I like that red dress, they'll be like, I like the blue dress too. And so, all right, here we go.
Yeah, it's really, sometimes it's hard to set boundaries when we don't know who we are.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how we can go about setting boundaries, and what are the things that we are looking for to set boundaries.
Yeah. So I think we touched on that, that to be able to set boundaries, you need to know something about your own values, right?
Yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. What is permissible? What's okay?
Yeah.
Your needs, your wants.
Yes. One of the workbooks that I use a lot is by Sharon Martin. It is titled The Better Boundaries Workbook. And anybody can use that book.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
Uh-huh.
I really like it because it really takes you through the step by step into really first identifying your own values, and your own interests, so that you can know who you are starting at that point to start building boundaries and practicing.
Right. And today we're going to be really, I say, springboarding off of her work, using some of the concepts and ideas in her book. And like you said, I think it's a great resource.
Yes.
For sure.
Some of the, I was thinking about not only boundaries, but boundaries lead into self-esteem, but too, it's also how we assert ourselves and how we, communicate those boundaries, right? And so being assertive, we're still going to be kind, yet we're going to say no. And then we're going to move on, and we don't have to feel guilty about saying no.
Yeah. Yeah, I think boundaries help us know what we're responsible for, that we're responsible for our thoughts, we're responsible for our feelings, we're responsible for our actions, we're responsible for our words, we're responsible for our bodies. We're not responsible for the thoughts and feelings and actions of other people.
Or anybody else's actions.
Yeah, but we're responsible for ours. Yeah, and then limits, boundaries help define, define or set limits, how we are willing to be treated, or how we expect to be treated by others.
Yeah. And we want to make sure that the people around us know what we like and don't like. Because I might take you a chocolate cupcake.
Right.
And you're allergic to chocolate.
Definitely.
So I wouldn't want to give you that chocolate.
Right.
Cupcake.
Don't give me something with gluten. No. Yeah. And for sure. Yes.
Yeah. So we talked about how.
I was going to say safety. Safety is a big issue in the benefits of boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
Physical, emotional safety. It's all about that.
Yeah.
That's a big, big, big part of boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
Is being able to, set yourself up for safety.
Yeah. What's really funny, I just thought about this, is a friend of mine will come over and she's been trauma dumped on, and she's like, "Hey, you want to talk?" And I'm like, "Not really," because I already know what happened. So I'm like, "No, not really." And so I told her, I said, "Why don't you set these boundaries with your friend and just tell her, hey, that is like too much for my heart right now. Let me get back to you."
Right.
But she's like, "No." She's like, I don't know how to tell her. I want her to be able to, you know, to share that with me. So I'm like, but if it's too much, you need to let her know, because she is carrying already so much weight, and now this an additional emotional weight, is added to her, and she has a hard time struggling with that.
Yeah. And that's a good point. We often encounter that, where there are times when we're going to be willing to extend ourselves, and then there are going to be times when we're not at a place really to extend ourselves. And so earlier, you were talking about be flexible. Sometimes that your boundaries might change. Or, there's such a thing as soft boundaries and hard boundaries. Soft boundaries, you might be a little flexible with that sometimes, just depending on the situation.
Yeah.
But a hard boundary is one of those that back to that seat.
It's just a no. It's just a no. No is a complete sentence,
I think Oprah said that.
No. I don't know who said it, but I'm just saying no is a complete sentence, because, a lot of times we feel like we have to give an explanation.
Yeah. I'm definitely in that camp, okay? I'm not necessarily
Really?
proud.
No.
Yes. I'm not necessarily proud of it, but yeah, I can work on that. That's something that I can take with me and work on, that being okay with just saying no.
Yeah. So how can we communicate healthy boundaries, to where we are making sure that the other person feels heard and seen, and we want to make sure that we leave them, that we come back to them in a good relationship.
For sure. Yeah. And just like when we started out, our premises with the intention to be kind, with the intention to be caring, right? To ourselves and to others. Boundaries aren't a bad word. Boundaries are a good thing.
It could be a bad word if it's the boundary that somebody else wants, right?
Oh, true. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
When they hear the word no and they don't know how to handle that, and they're huffing and puffing, know.
And one of the things that I read was, if you set a boundary, and you've done it appropriately, and someone immediately starts arguing with that boundary, then they're probably not necessarily a friend. They may be a pretender, or they may be a manipulator. So that's, that's a red flag. If you set a boundary and somebody immediately, not just necessarily once, but it's a pattern, right?
They want to wear you down because they're used to wearing other people down.
Yeah, it's a pattern. It could be a pattern. So that might be a red flashing light or a yellow flashing light that you need to take notice and see if that
they need to run. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So, sometimes
let me say something about that, okay? Because a lot of times we're the yin and the yang, right?
Yeah.
And so I know that you're saying run, but depending on the level of the boundary, right?
Oh yeah.
It's okay for people to grow and learn. And if that person has never had anybody who set boundaries, they didn't have to learn limits. They're a good person, but that's not a part of their history. They love you. They care about you. And if you go to them and you're assertive, you're confident, you're specific, you're these things that are good ways to communicate.
Very clear. You're very clear.
You're very clear and kind. You're kind. Then that person, give them a second to adjust, right?
Right.
Especially if it's something a boundary that you're changing in the middle of the relationship. But let's give people an opportunity to grow as well.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
That's where we have those swinging doors.
Yeah. So don't necessarily run on a soft one, but
now you're telling people what to do. We're not trying to set a boundary for you people. And we're not trying to set boundaries for them.
Okay. I thought you said run. All right. So I was just giving clarity to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good discussion for sure.
Yeah. Because you know what? My boundary may be different than your boundary.
For sure.
You know, and it could be from our upbringing, our experiences. It could be that maybe I'm bougie, but y'all know I'm not.
Or just like we said, what's currently going on in your life. can
Yeah.
impact your
It
boundaries,
could be like
right?
camping, right? I'm going to go glamping, but I'm not going to go camping. So that's my boundary right there. Is if there's an inside restroom, running water, I'm good. But if I'm out on a tent and it's just out there, I might have to think about it a little bit,
So
depending on the weather.
that's a personal boundary. A
Yes.
personal boundary. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Right?
So, when we talk about boundaries, there are times that we might violate boundaries, right?
Yeah.
I say we might. I mean, we do, right? And
Every
so,
day.
what are some ways that we violate other people's boundaries?
You know, sometimes I feel like, not that we want to, I think someone making somebody feel guilty about not doing something when their plate is still full, and
Yep.
we're like, oh, can you just do this one time, and we're trying to get them to do something, and then we kind of guilt them into it.
Yeah, if we're being manipulative, right? And we try to make them feel guilty, then sure, that's a way of violating others' boundaries.
Breaking trust is another one.
That's a big one for me. That's a really important one for me. I want to be able to trust you. And so, if you can't keep a confidence or those sorts of things, then that's a hard one for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, giving unwanted advice. Giving unwanted advice. That's a way of violating a boundary,
Oh yeah.
for sure.
Unless they ask, and being pushy.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are pushy without even realizing, So.
I don't think we've mentioned this one. When we invalidate other people's feelings.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
I mean, we can honor their feelings, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's done most of the time unintentionally. We don't recognize it because we don't really understand our boundaries. But I'd say always validate feelings, because it's not our feelings, but it's their feelings, and we want them to be seen and heard. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, is to make sure that people are seen and heard and feel safe.
Right. In terms of how do we set boundaries for ourselves? And we've mentioned this a couple of times. A big part of being able to set boundaries for yourself is to understand your values, understand your needs, understand your wants.
You got to know who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't, then nobody else will.
Kind of sometimes what your goals are. If I'm setting boundaries for myself, right?
Yeah.
I might have a boundary that I will talk to myself kindly. I have a
That's a great
boundary
one.
that I will not, use negative language about myself.
Yeah. That's a verbal boundary.
Right.
That
That
we
I
all
have
have.
with myself.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I catch myself speaking to myself, it's in my thoughts. Oftentimes a person will speak to themselves in their thoughts, then that's a boundary I'm going to set with myself. So I'm going to move away from that. Might be a boundary about work, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great boundary. I mean, we can have physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, emotional boundaries, time boundaries. What's and material boundaries, verbal boundaries. And when I think about material, I think about someone borrowing something from me and not returning it in the same shape that it was.
Right. Right. So let's talk about that for a second, okay?
Yeah.
I might be in this camp at some point. I don't know. But let's say that let's say I borrow something and it is not as pristine as when I got it, okay? What are my options there? So my options
Buy me
are
a new one.
Yeah, I could buy you a new one. I could go back and I could just declare and be clear, hey, this isn't as great as you gave it to me. I'm willing to buy you a new one or whatever, right?
Right.
But just be upfront. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is such an important one, because that also is part of creating trust. because then you kept my boundary, you told me about it. And so that creates trust. And, it doesn't really matter now that it's not in the same shape because you told me about it and I feel okay about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't, then I'm going to trust that you're going to let me know.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I have a friend, and I love this, but my friend says, clarity is kindness.
Yes.
I love that. I use that a lot. And so in relationships, when we're clear about our boundaries, then that gives that person an option to, to either honor them, not honor them, or
Right.
choose not to be in a relationship or whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
One thing that I don't know, I think we kind of skipped over a little bit, but is talking about how to handle when people do
Oh,
violate our
yeah.
boundaries, right?
Yeah.
That's a really important piece.
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, and going back to that soft and hard
Mm-hmm.
boundaries. So if somebody violates my boundaries, I've got to decide, what my response is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think we don't want to go into thinking of responses to boundary violation as punishment. It's not about that, but there are responses or maybe consequences
I
when
think it,
somebody violates our
mm-hmm.
boundaries, and
Yeah.
they can be, different depending on the seriousness
Yeah.
of it, right? If it's a
Right.
physical violation, then of course you have to take your safety
Right.
as very important and paramount, right?
Right.
But yeah, I know that, even as we're talking about this, and sometimes lightheartedly, there are, all of us have suffered, boundary violations before, all different kinds of levels and
Oh, yeah.
capacities, right? And so, there are people out there that have had boundaries violated, and, they've been hurt. They've
Right.
possibly been hurt physically, possibly been hurt emotionally, or both.
When you say that, the main thing I feel like is one, give yourself a voice, and two, have the courage to say no.
Yeah.
And if you can't say no, then at least put the topic on the table so that you can discuss it.
Right. If it's a safe situation and you can
Right.
do that,
Right.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an important part as well, because there are times when a boundary has been violated, and we're emotionally hurt, right?
Right.
And we're in a hard situation where we love or care about that relationship, but yet have to make a decision based on our values. And so sometimes we're broken when we're responding to violated boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And if we look a little deeper, there are layers to that. There are times when a person violates a boundary
Yeah.
and they've suffered loss as well. So there's loss both ways,
Right.
right?
Right.
And they're broken,
I'm thinking.
right?
I'm thinking of the boundary of time. You know, you're here talking. I'm like, oh man. And I was thinking, okay, so like if you have a friend and they keep being late,
Uh-huh.
you're going to show up for this one thing and they're always late. And so to expect that of them. And that's when it's like, okay, is that a soft boundary? It could become a hard
It could
boundary,
become a hard boundary for sure.
So it's
Yeah.
moving on that spectrum of like,
Right.
that it could become a
Uh-huh.
hard boundary.
It definitely could, because
Yeah.
it could be costing you time. It could be, you might be a
Well,
type of person who gets anxious in
the
those
consideration
situations.
for another human being.
Yeah, respect.
Yeah.
You're not feeling respected, and so a way of validating yourself, having self-esteem, is to set some boundaries there. And one last thought on this particular area
Yeah.
is, when you honor yourself with your boundaries, you're really honoring the other person as well. So
Oh, of course.
yeah.
Yeah.
So um
boundaries go both ways. I feel, when you set a boundary, you're being fair to the other person because they know exactly what to expect out of you. If I'm always late, I'm going to tell you I'm always running late.
Right.
Or if I'm early, I'm going to tell you I'm early, I'm here, but don't worry about it. Just get here when you get here. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. And remember, if you're setting boundaries, like I said earlier on, it's not a bad word. It's really a sign of emotional intelligence. It's a way of being kind. And so, don't feel guilty about setting boundaries.
No, teach people how to treat you.
Right. And, as we move forward, I want you to think about, and I'm going to be thinking about this as well, but what's one boundary this week that I can be committed to? And it might be setting a boundary. It might be holding to a response for a boundary that maybe I've already explained I've already set the boundary with the person. I've already explained it. And so maybe if there's violation, then maybe I'm going to carry out a response to that I've already put on the table, right?
Right.
Or, maybe I'm going to make sure that I'm honoring someone else's boundary. So think about that. What's a boundary that you could commit to, carrying out this week?
I think the main important thing is to give yourself grace and flexibility, and love yourself like you would love somebody else, and set those boundaries so that people will know how to treat you.
Right, definitely. So this week and going forward, we hope that you've picked up something about boundaries, right?
Right.
Do a little more research on your own and implement those in your life. I'm thinking about, do yourself a favor, and the next time there's a holiday or a family dinner and you've got that special loved one that always wants to talk about politics or something else that, gets to you, set that boundary. Free the whole family, people. Free the whole family.
You mean there are going to be no fights at the dinner? So, well, thanks for being part of thank you for being part, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and like, and help us to get to 1,000 subscribers.
Let's do 1,000.
1,000. Let's do it.
I believe.
Own your wellness.
Elevate your life. The content presented in this episode or any others should not be considered therapy and is not prescriptive. If you have questions or concerns about mental health, contact your primary care physician or local mental health provider. The opinions expressed are solely ours and are not representative of our employers or coworkers.